be talking about a lot. Okay, I believe we have a quorum. We can officially begin this conversation. Just move past the awkward banter. I am Richard Rushfield. This is the Rushfield Lunch. Every week, I am joined by some of the most interesting people of our times: artists, thinkers, doers, philosophers, tycoons, what have you. And today, our guest is all of those.
Not a
Artist, thinker.
tycoon.
You're an empire builder, though.
I
That counts as
document empires.
that. You do. But you made one of your own with an incredible career that we're going to be talking a lot about. And our guest, of course, is Lauren Greenfield, uh, the great documentarian and photographer. If you have questions for her, comments for both of us, write them in the comments. We love questions and comments. Send them along. No subject too small. Personal advice, what have you. Lauren, we go back a couple years. I first met you when you were in the Crossroads School production of Stage Door, and I think about 1982, if I may say so. I worked on the sound and tech of that, which I have to say my tech my ability to hit the cues came under some attack during that production. But we go back a few days, so good to see you here.
Good to see you, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be invited.
Despite my screwing up the tech cues on Stage Door.
I was not a theater person, so I don't know if that was me in Stage Door. I
You
did.
were absolutely in Stage
Was
Door.
I?
You were. I remember that firmly. So you were involved in that. So, but I will check the records and get back to you after this. But
Well, I feel like we have in common that those years at Crossroads were very formative, especially in the arts.
well, let's talk about that because you I put your work in sort of three buckets, if I may. They're very nice buckets, uh, the first one is sort of the youth in LA, and within that you kind of have this triptych of well, yeah, we have our own youth growing up, and then you visited in the 90s, and then revisited it with your current projects. Let's start at the beginning. Like, what was growing up in this less than zero world and time like, and what did that mean to you? You talk about how you came away with ambivalent feelings about it.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
So I went to a very alternative school almost all the way up, like until ninth grade. And then I spent ninth grade in France or 10th grade in France. And then I came to Crossroads for 11th and 12th. So I wasn't a lifer in the sense like I didn't have my friends all the way up. And I think like a lot of kids in high school, I didn't feel like I fit in. I also, at that time, there was like the culture at Crossroads was very entertainment infused. Like there were a lot of kids whose parents worked in entertainment. People were like going to special things on the weekends, like premieres and backstage at rock concerts. And my parents were professors. And my dad has a funny story about going to a PTA meeting and somebody asking him what he did. And he said he was a professor of medicine, which he thought was the kind of like highest pinnacle he could achieve. And they were like, oh, that's too bad. You must not make very much money. And so I kind of, and I grew up in communes too in Venice. And at that time, Venice is not the gentrified Venice that it is now.
Very different Venice.
Place. And so they're different. And people did not raise families there then. In fact, I remember going to camp in the summers and when I was very shy and when they would ask me where I was from and I said Venice, they thought I said Van Nuys. And I didn't correct them because it was like they had like picket fences, which is kind of what I wanted. And so I think just now having studied teenagers for a long time, I get that like no teenager feels like they fit in. But that was a kind of formative experience for me. And I think I was kind of my parents were from the East Coast, and, like I said, I lived in Venice and commune, so I was kind of shocked by the materialism there, the designer clothes, and cars. At that time, Crossroads was bifurcated by an active alley,
Well,
and
that was it. The our yard was actually a parking lot. Like
it was
we
a parking lot,
parked your car.
and
So
people would, drive their cars, and you'd see, you
you're
know
very aware of what everybody. I had I had a big fight with Super Agent Jay Suarez, who you remember recently, because I referred in a piece to him his Scirocco, and he was very indignant, saying that it wasn't Scirocco. But that's the that it we were very aware. Like I can remember what everybody drove back then.
and I think, in my photography, I went on to also look at kind of Mean Girls and fitting in different ways in like Edina, Minnesota, for example, what it was like to be 13. But, I think a lot of my experience photographing and then filming youth culture was kind of inspired by this time and the huge insecurity that I felt, not just about the material things, but also about my body, whether it measured up, how kind of body image issues. And I was really struck by how much kids were kind of impacted by this culture of materialism and celebrity and image. And that became my first work. My first project was I actually started by going back to Crossroads, and then I ended up fanning out to a lot of other schools. But I was really looking at how kids grow up quickly in this media saturated environment and how they're influenced by what I call the values of Hollywood, which for me meant materialism, image, celebrity. And interestingly enough, in that work, I also used the kids as the truth tellers. Even then, I was really stunned by how aware and insightful they were, even when they were criticized, even they were critical about their own lives. Like I remember there was this kid, Adam, I interviewed who said, everything is about money. You need to photograph money if you're photographing growing up in LA. But then he said, money ruins kids and money ruined me. So I think that perspective of the subjects being like showing me what their lives, but also having insight and being critical of the values, that really informed my work because when I did fast forward, I didn't know I was going to use their words in the book. And using first person interviews and with the pictures ended up being really important for my work and ended up also driving me to film this idea of like, having these subjects speak. And so, yeah, when I did social studies, which is my new series about teenagers and social media. It was kind of a going back to the place I grew up, but also the place where my first work, fast forward, happened and looking at it in now. The first work was in the 90s, and I was looking at media, but it was a very different media. It was a media that's innocuous by today's standards. It was
Well,
MTV.
we're going to get to that. So, but let's start with after college, you went and you did some sort of traditional photographer's route, going through National Geographic and you filmed some Mayan villages. But then there's a quote from you said, "I realized I wanted to examine a subject that I knew well and that was closer to my heart, the world I grew up in, specifically the world of high school, about which I had ambivalent memories. I wanted to study a culture that would allow me to bring my own experience to my perspective." So you returned to Crossroads and to LA in 1997, so a decade after you were in high school. What struck you when you came back about what had changed or what was 1997, which is still pre-social, pre-cell phones,
Yeah.
pre everything.
Well, in terms of what you just mentioned, my perspective, I was very much formed at that point, not just from my personal experience, but also had studied social studies and anthropology and sociology and economics. And um, my first project after college was about the French aristocracy. So I was looking at old money, and I was looking at class, and I was looking at one of the things that I was really interested in the French aristocracy was it was this elite class, but they didn't have money anymore. And coming from LA, where I felt like money defined class, I thought that was kind of an
Hmm.
oxymoron. Like, how could you have this elite class without money? So and then I did a Maya village for National Geographic, and I felt very much a fish out of water there. I felt really like, who am I to tell this story? It took all of my energy and research to just get access to photograph in a place where traditionally they felt a photograph could take your soul. And I felt like I didn't really have
By the
the
way,
lead.
is that true? Can a photograph take your soul? Every time a camera is aimed at me, I have that thought.
I
Can,
think now
can,
we find our soul in the photograph.
interesting. That is where our soul lives. Go on,
But
sir.
so when I was in the Maya village struggling with access, I started dreaming about a place where people actually like to be photographed, and a place that I actually knew about and knew the codes and knew the social life and knew the values, and I thought could bring my own personal understanding and personal perspective, and personal passion to the subject. And so I started thinking about doing this project in LA. And so when I came back both as somebody who had been from there, but I also came back with kind of the eye of a sociologist or an anthropologist and wanted to take that kind of perspective and apply it to this place that I thought was really important, as important as at National Geographic at that time, and even in photojournalism, there was a very much an emphasis on going into the exotic,
Yeah, yeah.
bringing back images. And I thought, what if I could go into this place that affects people all over the world? It was a time of Beverly Hills 90210. It was a time of Bret Easton Ellis's Lesson Zero. LA wasn't just a place affecting LA, but it was a place going out into the world in the form of media. And so that really drove my motivation to want to study LA culture and youth culture as this place not that wasn't just about LA, but was about where you see the extreme manifestations of trends that were affecting people all over.
And what had changed the most when you came back to do this project from when you had grown up? What was different? Was it?
Think what was different was the media. It was a time of MTV and cable, 24-hour cable, and kids were looking at each other. Kids around the city were looking at each other. Rich kids were looking at the culture of East LA and gangster rap and tagging and party crews. And there was also this materialism that was part of music videos and rap culture. And so it was a time where, in a way, young people were connecting in this spread out city of suburbs connected by freeways in this new and kind of exciting way. Although I remember talking about it at one point and saying, like, kids from different neighborhoods have so much in common, but it's a love for Versace. It wasn't really like, um, necessarily like deep connections. It was more like trend based and in a way brand based. But I that was really interesting to see how kids from around the city were experiencing the shared culture, that there was a kind of homogenization of youth culture through the media, and that became my subject.
And it's amazing how they were able to do that and connect. We can It's hard to even picture, like, how did people find each other before there were social media, before there were phones, there's barely even websites at that point. But somehow this network formed. And what's interesting is that what I see is the difference between our youth there and what you captured is there was a sort of self-consciousness about sort of the way they present themselves, speaking to media archetypes and becoming those media archetypes, but they're also the people who are making the media and because we're in Hollywood to do it. So it's kind of this circle of not virtuous circle, but unvirtuous circle of archetyping and doing. Can you, I'm babbling a little, but do you?
Well, it was also the beginning of some big trends in the media. Like some of the like in one of the pictures that I got when I was doing Fast Forward, it's at a party and there's a young Kim and Kourtney Kardashian at 13 at one of the parties. I didn't even include that in Fast Forward. I ended up including it in my movie Generation Wealth. And see them as significant. The value of fame has really risen from that time, and that was, like, been one of the things that I've really been looking at. I think at that time, it was the parents that were making media, but by the time I did social studies, the young people are making media too, and one of the things that really changed between those 2 eras is when I first did Fast Forward, I showed that work around the world from Moscow to France to Italy to the heartland in the US, and people often said, "Oh, those LA people, those crazy LA people." In England, they were like, "Well, it's interesting, but it's not us." I think that has really changed
Hmm.
because even at the time, I felt like this is not about LA. This is just LA is where you see the extreme manifestations of these trends that are often coming from the media, affecting other people. But the the time at which those trends go around has shrunk radically. That, it used to be LA was the bellwether of trends to come, and it might take years. But now in a internationally viral world, people already see, with social studies, for example, that it's coming to a theater near them or already playing.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, in fast forward, I think they are something exotic that I think at the time most people um who saw that book probably if they weren't from West Los Angeles would see it as something foreign and apart. But I think the people in social studies they some of them were more affluent, but I think sort of the looks and the archetypes and all that uh, probably would be very familiar to just about anyone in the world now.
Yeah, and that's what's happened as we've shown it, um, around the world. That's exactly the reaction I've gotten. I mean, LA is still the place, it's still the tip of the spear. It's where the creators are, it's where, um, the value of fame kind of burns most brightly and hotly, but, um, people are really watching very similar media, and even before I did social studies, when I did, like, for example, a story about being 13 in Edina, Minnesota, you could see how commercial culture was driving trends to be more homogenized, whether it was, the fact that everybody had to shop at 3 brand name stores or everybody was gathering at Starbucks. There were just kind of, we've been moving in that direction in capitalist culture, but social media just amplifies it all.
But what is it like photographing young people, getting finding your and social studies is very that had these questions a lot. Like how do you find the people? How do you get the permission? How, do all their friends' parents have to give permissions also? Like, how does that whole process work of finding your characters and putting this together?
Yeah. Well, I love working with young people. I mean, when I first started with Fast Forward, I was a young person myself. Sometimes when I was shooting, I remember I was at Hollywood High one day.
You're still a young person. We both
And
are.
when I was at Hollywood High, I was photographing and then the kids went to class, the bell rang, and then I went to get a soda out of the vending machine, and a security guard put his hand over the slot to block it and said, "Back to class."
Right.
And
I
I
would. I
love
would.
that.
Oh, I
I
would. I
love
would
that,
save
but
money.
by the time I did social studies, I was a parent and trying to understand my own teenagers and, very much inspired to do this by my own teenagers, and so either way, like, as a kid myself or as a parent, I find teenagers really fascinating, and one of the things I love about a lot of my work is about the trends, the social trends and values that affect us all, and one of the things I love about teenagers is their transparency and their honesty in ways that sometimes the adult world is not capable or does not want to kind of reveal themselves. And so I think in social studies, it is about teenagers. It is about the first generation that grew up on social media and how it's affecting them. But it also is about all of us and our relationship to social media and the way it divides and the way it distracts and the way it amplifies our wanting to be something other than we are, which has kind of been a theme in all of my work from the beginning. Um, and yeah, so I really love working with teenagers. This project, the access was particularly difficult
Mm.
because it was a social experiment where the kids not only needed to agree to let me follow them in their lives for a year, but also had to agree to share their phones, this most intimate,
Yeah.
kind of cross between a diary and, your personal conversations. So that was huge.
How
And
how
that
how
was
did
awesome.
how did you talk them into that?
Yeah. I think that first of all, it's an extraordinary group in the series, and I think that it was coming out of COVID. It was the first time kids were coming back to school, and I think a lot of kids had this feeling like something is not quite right, and maybe we should discuss it. Maybe we should think about it and talk about it. And so I think a lot of the kids in the project had skin in the game and wanted to, deal with this issue and look at this issue. And, they kinda came to it from different experiences. And I talked to, more than 200 kids, in the spring before we began to shoot in the fall. And we
So
did a kind
what
of
are, what are you what
test.
are you looking for when you talk to the
Yeah.
kid? What are in terms of who you're going to focus on? You're not
Yeah. I
just looking
mean,
for the biggest and the loudest, but what?
I'm looking for well, first of all, I was looking for ideas at that point from them about what were the really pressing issues that we needed to cover, and I started hearing stories about being and slut shaming and eating disorders and body image and fitting in and going viral and nudes, and I started hearing things that would eventually make it into the show, and then what I was looking for was a combination of people whose lives would be interesting kind of following, also who had had different kinds of experiences with social media, like the kids are very diverse socioeconomically. They come from
Mhm.
areas all around Los Angeles. I began at Pali High, but it ends up being kids from 10 different schools, public and private. But they also, most importantly, had different experiences and different relationships to social media. Some, like Jonathan, didn't use it at all, but most used it a lot and in different interesting ways. One was an entrepreneur, one was a musician, one had a podcast about um, body image. Jonathan was a young filmmaker and was the school videographer. Um, and then some were just interesting, eager to dive in with me. And I was kind of looking for these co collaborators. And some of their stories, which ended up being like highly relevant and highly important, I had no idea about in the beginning. Like Ivy, for example. Ivy was a creative, interesting photographer, and I liked her spirit and I liked her photographs, and she kinda reminded me of, like, a young Nan Golden, like, photographing her friends. but I had no idea about the things that ended up unfolding in her story, which kind of became the most important, which was that she had a family that was divided by the algorithm, essentially, divided by conspiracy theory, and had a brother that became her sister in the course of the project in a family where one part of the family did not accept that. And so basically, I also was looking for kids who would go on a journey with me, who would
Mm.
allow me in and go on a journey. And that's always a journey too, in terms of access and trust. Like there were kids that, you know, maybe were not super forthcoming in the beginning, but as we got to know each other, as they understood the project, as we had these group discussions, would allow me in more and more.
And what's it like convincing the parents? Like the I mean, I could imagine like a documentarian shows up at my house and say, "Oh, I want to tape all your child's cell phone, all your
Yeah.
child's text conversations." And I'd
Yeah.
be like, "You want
You
to do
know,
what?"
it was not for everyone. Some parents said no, they're not the ones, in the show. The parents in the show, I think, trusted me, trusted we were always transparent about what the project was. It was looking at social media. So I think they had to think that was important in some way. One thing that's real different now than when I started this work, than when I did Fast Forward, for example, where I was right out of college, is that now people have Googled and watched all your work by the time you show up on their
Mm.
doorstep. So, I think that that's a calling card. They could see, that I was a serious person, that I was doing this for serious reasons. And and then they took a leap of faith. And when we had our premiere, a lot of the parents were there and a lot of them, were very nervous. Most of the kids had already seen it at that point. We watched it one-on-one together, but their parents were seeing it for the first time. And it's been amazing. Like, a lot of the kids have been Q&As with me. We've done outreach to schools, universities. We met lawmakers in Sacramento. And I think the parents have been real proud of the journeys they've taken. See, things about the show that's different is the kids are not just the subjects, they're also the experts. And their insights are so powerful. By the end, even despite all of these dark places that they've kind of taken us by the hand and shown us, they are also showing leadership and hope about a pathway forward. I mean, one thing that was really interesting is a lot of the kids said their choice, they want have social media. They were nostalgic for the 90s. They were nostalgic for the parents' generation. Not something I did not expect at all. But, it really we do these discussions throughout the series, and that's what I really learned also about them talking to each other about what were the big issues, what they thought were important. So, they learned a lot of the subject matter that we covered.
What So what do you think of the seeing the effect of social media on these people and comparing it to our age? I mean, in our age, in our day we had very few guardrails in sort of the real world. You could uh, you could take the bus downtown, you could do anything you want, but you were kind of your experience was limited to that which you met face to face. By and large, or maybe go see R-rated movies or something. But beyond that, it was very limited. And these days, I think they have a lot of guardrails and a lot of helicopter parenting and everything, but they have access to this world that has every scary thing and every scary message and uh, everything you can imagine in their face. So how which is better, and how has it changed them from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different. I think that what you see in the show, what we learn from the kids is it's a very tough world that they're navigating in terms of the toxic effect of 24/7 comparison that, I mean, I remember that high school feeling that high school fishbowl where, there's popular kids and there's not popular kids, and some kids have the cool clothes and some kids have the cool cars. But imagine not just looking at the people in your friend group or in the popular group or in the school, but looking at people all over the world,
Mhm.
many of whom are not even real or who are photoshopped or face-tuned or AI'd or whatever it is.
Presenting
Um,
at the very least, presenting themselves, presenting you with just a very narrow sliver of what their life
that's
is.
the other thing, is having this media where everybody is presentational, that it's not about friendship one to one, but everybody's kind of presenting their best selves. And
There's an
I think,
AA expression. It says they say don't compare your insides to other people's outsides. But now it is like people's outsides are a very curated portrait that people are constantly judging themselves against.
well, that's the other thing is like, you know, in fast forward, I was looking at the primacy of image, how image had become more important. Well, in social media, I mean, almost all of the things that I looked at in fast forward are just highly, highly amplified by the time I did social studies, from body image to, all of these comparison things that really has an effect on mental health. So we've seen like the mental health um, kind of statistics with depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and eating disorders just go off the charts. My first film was about eating disorders, and it came out in 2006. And at that time, 1 in 7 girls had an eating disorder, and that seemed like a huge number. Well,
That's sort
when I started social studies, one girl said to me, "Half of my friends have eating disorders from TikTok, and the other half are lying."
oh my god.
So everything has just gone off the charts in ways that I think are extremely difficult for young people to navigate. So, and then the other thing is that loss of innocence that I was documenting with Fast Forward has also gone off the charts because when we buy a child a phone, and it is usually the parents buying kids a phone because they want them to be safe.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about what you were saying about us kind of roaming free, but that is why many parents give their kids a phone. They want to know
Yeah.
where they are. They want to be able to
Where
reach.
they are, can call if there's any problem. It's just a way of keeping in touch and being able
But
to check.
what they're handing to them is a portal into the whole world.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember my mom, I was so mad at my mom because she would heavily regulate our television. That, whatever the regulators were doing, which was a lot at that time, wasn't good enough for her. I couldn't watch anything that was sexist. I couldn't watch anything that was racist. I couldn't watch anything that had stereotypes. I couldn't watch anything with violence. I wasn't allowed to watch Saturday Night Fever. And at the time, I really, like, rebelled against it and some of the things I watched anyway, but at least it made me think about why they were verboten to her, and we would have conversations about that. Now like pornography, for example, whose influence is also covered in social studies, and the kids talk a lot about pornography and nudes being sent and the sexual trends and how they learn about sex. Um, it's, once you give a kid that phone, they have access to that too. I think it's hard to even imagine. I know you have like a very Hollywood audience. Hollywood has always been highly regulated and people are worried about
Yeah.
ratings and, the TV regulators and what you can say and what you can't say. And to imagine that we would have this media available for kids 24 hours that is completely unregulated and where pornography and gambling and, everything.
All the worst people and all the worst trends in the world are available to you and are often the most successful things on there.
And unlike, um, the the television companies and the movie studios and the publishers, the social media companies are not considered publishers, so they have no accountability, they have no responsibility, And of course, that is a huge problem. And I think what I heard from kids is they want to be protected. Every kid had some coming of age experience. Ivy tells a story about um, be getting onto Instagram and being really interested in baking and loving baking pictures, cooking pictures with
Mm.
pastel colors. And all of a sudden, as she's looking through this, a picture comes up of a young woman holding up her shirt, exposing her breasts. And she's introduced to that sexuality and that kind of exhibitionism, but she's also introduced to the people commenting on it and remarking on it and starts to think, what would it be like if I showed somebody a picture like that? We have Sydney's story where she gets on social media and is really interested in photography. That's her passion. And she starts posting sunsets and pictures of her photography. Doesn't get any likes. Then she posts a picture of herself at the beach in a bathing suit. The body showing that gets likes. And then that leads to more videos like that, more likes, more interaction with, kind of inappropriate boys and men. So I think, it's just to go back to how you started this, even though we were running around without supervision, in some ways, we were safer than keeping your kids at home in their room with this device.
Yeah,
And I think that's
pornography was not. I mean, pornography was something that like you saw like in the liquor store or magazine rack. Like there were these things wrapped in plastic. Like where it was, but it wasn't something you encountered, except in very odd situations. That just not an element in our life there.
right. And so I think there's so much now that kids are being exposed to that parents can't regulate. And I think that's, just gets back to why parents participated in this because I think they saw the value too.
There's one moment that, given what came, sort of took my breath away. Just rewatching it in last week, in the opening when you're showing. So this is right after COVID, and people are just coming back from COVID, and they're all wearing masks and everything. And you're at Pally High, and you're seeing everyone walking around Pally High, and then you have the principal addressing the students saying, "This class, you guys have been through so much. No one's ever been through as much as you have, and what an incredible, resilient class." And you just like knowing what's coming down the highway towards that school. Like it's like it was really an intense moment there. I thought. Did you think back about what
Are you
when
talking
with the
about the
fire?
fire?
Yes, that the school that you see there is now closed down and
Yeah.
evacuated and relocated to Sears in Santa Monica. And uh, how many of the students you were probably graduated by now, but a lot of them probably lost their homes and
Yeah.
did all that. And it's on. How did you, what during the fires? What did you think about? I mean, they'd been through so much already
I know.
that you painted it. It just
I mean, the kids that were in my show were already graduated, but I think it was just that thing of like your school and these landmarks. Like I thought about the Palisades Library because that was a place,
you know
you know, where kids gathered and they studied and they did college applications and then the Palisades Village. And I mean, Cooper was saying like it made her nostalgic. I think it's just one of those wonderful things about documentary film is you're capturing lightning in a bottle. Like you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and then you've kind of had this history. Um, and Richard, you froze.
I'm sorry. We had a little. There's one of our connections is. There we go. We're back. We're back here. What's it? I just want to say we're coming into the final stretch here. So and as predicted, we barely made a dent in my list of topics to talk about. But for all the folks who are with us, if you have questions, comments, now's the time to get them in. So give us your questions there at the bottom. So that brings us to one of the other big buckets I want to talk about with you is that you have that one of your big themes is sort of people of sort of extreme wealth and their kind of aesthetics and sensibility and this culture of kind of excess that has kind of become the dominant sort of moral framework of our society and all that. And talking about the Queen of Versailles and also the Queen of Versailles and also your film about this incredible couple that built this amazing estate. I'll let you describe it. And also with Imelda Marcos, the Kingmaker. Talk to me about that. Your feeling about that?
Yeah, and also generation wealth. I mean, which was this 25-year retrospective about looking at these values of wealth and consumerism and how they had kind of taken over our world. I mean, it's weird what's happened in our history. In a way, my work is like the history of the present. And it's, in a way, Generation Wealth, which captures some of this, kind of describes the culture that made Trump possible
Yeah,
and the
and I mean
values.
when Queen of Versailles came out, I mean this was, you know, I'd say the sort of oddball couple in, very extreme situation. But that's the president of the United States. I mean, that's it. That's the culture of the president of the United States now.
I know. I feel like at times people thought my work was superficial, but I remember writing a op-ed piece the called the Kardashian effect, the profound side of the superficial. I think with Queen of Versailles, we could not get anybody to finance it because they were like, why do we care about these rich people? And it was only when they came, it's the story is that they're building the biggest house in America, 90,000 square foot home inspired by Versailles, the palace in France, in Orlando. Bringing us, everything's coming from Florida these days. Um, and then the crash happens and they're overextended. And even these billionaires end up going into foreclosure. So it becomes this kind of supersized foreclosure story that ends up being an allegory for our oversized appetites and our overreach. And so in a way, its significance at that time was really about how it captured in a magnified lens what was going on with Americans from all classes who had extended too much and fell in the crash or lost their homes in the crash. And my background coming to that was also I had been covering the crash all over the world, from
Mm.
California to Dubai and to Europe. So it's kind of interesting that now, yeah, we see this David Siegel person who at the time, nobody could identify with, who was a kind of a king. He was called a timeshare king. He had a gold throne.
And he
Um,
came up. I mean, he was a TV repairman, right? But
he came up very modestly, and both he and his wife were like rags to riches people, kind of the apotheosis of the American dream. And in a way, how we were never satisfied. That it used to be we wanted this house, home ownership, picket fence. But here they had a 26,000 square foot starter mansion and it wasn't big enough. So they had to build a 90,000 square foot one. And by building too big, they lost everything. Well, after the crash, they came back. They lost their $600 million. They lost their tower, but they started building again. And, in a way, that's like the Trump story too, is like he's back. Like, in a way, it really embodies some of the values, some of the American values about like I remember Fran Lebowitz has this quote that really inspired me for Generation Wealth, where she said, everybody, Americans don't hate the rich because they always think that will be them someday.
Hmm.
And somehow, and that comes up in The Kingmaker too. Imelda Marcos, who, was the wife of deposed dictator, says, I am a star in the light of night for poor people. And somehow, and the movie is about the return of the Marcos, despite the fact that the Marcos stole $10 billion and ended up back in, were ousted by people power and unbelievably ended up back in power. And that's what the movie documents. And I should say it's on Paramount Plus, so watch it while you can.
The
It's
and
about
it's
the return to authoritarian regimes.
and Queen of Versailles is becoming a Broadway musical. Is a Broadway musical now. No.
Queen of Versailles is opening on Broadway in October. It's been a super exciting process. Stephen Schwartz wrote the music. It's the reuniting of the Wicked team. Kristin Chenoweth is playing Jackie Siegel, and F. Murray Abraham is playing David Siegel. And it's directed by Michael Arden, who's amazing. He just won the Tony for Maybe Happy Endings. And the production design is Dane Jeffries, who also just won the Tony. And I'm really excited about it. I've been working with the team since COVID. And yeah, I'm excited for people to see. And it really, it's very loyal to the movie, but it also brings us to the present in terms of the values of today. And it also incorporates a lot of Easter eggs from other parts of my work, from the insecurity of teenage girls to the challenges of aging for women and plastic surgery to the French aristocracy, which was the subject of my first project. And we have a kind of a French court in the play. So it's fun, but it's also tragic. It's kind of a black comedy.
And you were saying that your work has aroused this sort of new interest in Europe, where it's sort of seen as a window into kind of understanding what's happening to America at this moment. I can see how they would pick that up. How has that been explaining it in your travels there and explaining what's happening to them and how do they
Yeah, I
how do
mean, I feel like there's always been an interest in Europe because of the kind of fascination with America, but kind of with an othering too. And now I think there's a real, getting back to the culture that brought us Trump, the culture that sometimes they feel like they don't recognize. And so I had a retrospective in Thessaloniki, Greece, at the film festival there,
they?
and there were people were very moved by Generation Wealth, and the discussion that we had was really powerful. And say the Kingmaker, we showed there. Also, I showed social studies in a festival in Warsaw, but they also asked for the Kingmaker, and I think you know having dealing with authoritarian regimes, dealing with the threat of Russia, dealing with the changes with the US and NATO and whether they can depend on us. I think there's just a real desire to understand what's going on. Both the Kingmaker and social studies are about the power of social media, to revise history, when propaganda plus money create a revision of history. That's the story in The Kingmaker, is when you have all of this ill-gotten wealth and corruption in the government, and then that can be used to fund social media and, without any journalistic guardrail, and have this, what Imelda says in the movie is, perception is real and the truth is not. That's such a kind of like slogan for today in terms of how social media can revise the truth.
We have a question. Two people have asked versions of this question. I'll read you the latest one. Lauren, would you consider posting more as a creator yourself? Stuff like behind the scenes, personal stories, or educational content. Two people asked that, so there's
That's
a
interesting. Well, first off,
groundswell.
educational curriculum, which the Annenberg Foundation um, sponsored, and we're really proud of that. It's at learner.org slash social studies, and it's free for teachers and parents. Um, I've been using social media much more since the launch of the show because one of the things I discovered in the launch of the show was all of the media that we were doing to talk about the show, from Pivot to Nightline to Good Morning America to Favreau. It's all geared towards parents, and that young people are not watching that much TV anymore. So we've done both outreach in schools and also social media to reach out to young people because we really want to bring them the show. So we have had more of a social media presence. I'm also doing a museum show that's going to open in Berlin next fall about social studies, and it incorporates installations and experiential kind of installations, and also multimedia, and also large scale photographs, so that all people, but particularly young people, can really kind of come into the work in a experiential way.
Well, I'm speaking for the crowd. I'm calling for more frank content on your very for your wonderful, your lovely husband, Frank Evers. Great man. We want to see much more Frank out there in public.
Who's the
So
producer, unsigned producer sometimes. He's the producer, and he actually is the secret sauce that allows me to, do everything. I feel like in the life of an artist, you kind of burrow in and make stuff. I spent 3 years, making this, but he's the one that really helps it get out into the world, and, that's as important, especially today.
he is a great man. Give him our best. We come now to the final subject. The time is flown very quickly, but now we have to hit you with Professor Greenfield's curriculum for Hollywood. You get to assign the employees of Hollywood, the artists, the workers. They will watch or read or consume anything of your choice. So what are your reading or viewing assignments for Hollywood?
Well, okay, when it comes to social media, I have a few different buckets, if
Yeah.
if I may. When it comes to social
Right.
media, I think Adolescence, also lots of Emmy nominations this year, is amazing. And really speaks to a lot of the things in social studies, but from a completely different lens. Fiction, cautionary tale, but also really delves into this generation gap between parents and kids, which was also, one of the things I was so struck by. And then for reading material, Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation is fantastic. In terms of films, I was thinking about this since you said, and I mean, one of the films that made me want to be a filmmaker, that taught me about kind of seeing, was Chris Marker's Sunless Sans Soleil,
Mm.
which is just amazing. I think coming from anthropology and just seeing how through a film you can see the world, understand the world, the kind of personal lens, personal perspective. Um, Also thinking about what is truth, because the whole thing is told by a fictional narrator. And in that way, I also love Sarah Polley's Stories We Tell. I think documentaries that stretch the the medium, that make us think about truth and memory. And some newer ones, I loved The Painter and the Thief by Benjamin Ree, who also has The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, which is also nominated for an Emmy this year. And they're both amazing in having like really unexpected journeys. And I think that's like this amazing thing that happens in documentary, like in The Queen of Versailles or in The Kingmaker, and social studies too, where I had no idea where the story was going to go. And, that's my favorite thing about documentary. And then I was thinking about art films too. Like
Yeah.
one movie that I feel like didn't really get its due, but is so amazing, is Wim Wenders' film about Anselm Kiefer. It's called Anselm.
Mm.
And if it's possible to see in 3D, it's really amazing in 3D. And you really like learn about this life of an artist, and also this mix between the political and the personal and the creative journey in the political. You see him really processing the Holocaust and Germany's role in it, and in a way, like, you get to see what drives the artist. I also love that in the Nan Goldin film, Beauty and the Bloodshed, from a couple years ago, where you also really get insight into the art from getting to know the artist. And then there's also this political story about the opiate addiction, which I loved. Um, and then I guess the last thing that I think people should watch as a genre are these political protest films. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I just saw Deaf President Now, about the protest at Gallatin for a deaf president to the school. And it's a historical story, but it has a lot of resonance for where we are right now in terms of like not feeling like protest or our voice matters and seeing that it does kind of against all odds. Um, and similarly, I love Don Porter's John Lewis film,
Mm.
um, which I think also kind of makes us believe. And there's a smaller film that I saw this a couple months ago in Poland, but I think it was in Sundance last year, called Mr. Nobody Against Putin, which similarly shows this teacher, the school teacher, who very bravely films clandestinely in a school. And we see how propaganda and a war machine takes over
Mm.
everyday life in a school. And it's one of these like brave, insightful things that, I think the films about Russia, and I include like Navalny and the Pussy Riot in that, Russia really gives us a lot of insight into our experience now. Hopefully still as a cautionary tale, but
Hopefully, yes.
also they see the signs and they understand it. So those are the films I feel like are super relevant right now.
That is a great list. I'm ashamed I've seen too few of those, but I have my assignment now, and so do all of you. So you've got you can we watch them. Our guest has been documentarian, photographer, uh, thinker, woman of the world, Lauren Greenfield. Thank you so much. You'll have to come back and join us after your.
I should just say, like, if you haven't seen Social Studies, don't be afraid. It's hopeful in the end, and you can watch it on Hulu and Disney Plus. We're actually having some screenings coming up in the LA area. We're doing a screening in LA at Concordia on, I don't know, in I think we'll post it. And I think it's July, August 23rd. We're doing a screening in Ojai. It's been so fun to show it on the big screen and with Q&As with the kids, even though it's for TV.
And available for everyone on Hulu. It's a must watch to understand what's going on, and the best encapsulation of these trends that have overtaken our youth these days. So everyone must watch that. Thank you so much for joining us, Lauren. You'll come again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really my honor. And I'm so proud of you and everything you've done. Like you mentioned in the beginning, I've known you since high school, and it's amazing. When I heard you're getting name checked in the studio, I was just like so excited for you.
We were excited. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon, Lauren. Enjoy the vineyard.
Okay. Bye.
Take care.